I see it.
All right, we're live. Good deal.
All right.
All right, Jeff Woods, Dr. Woods, back in the
Hey.
house.
Yeah.
It's good to see you, man. I was kind of bummed that I didn't get to see you much before. We were trying to chart when you were leaving without asking you too much, and we're gonna like celebrate your last day here. But man, it was chaotic for me too with in service and
Yeah.
getting ready to go back to school.
Yeah. We had a lot of stuff going on with governor school, a lot of unexpected things. And so it got pretty hectic towards the end there. We were having to pack and do all that stuff at the same time. So, yeah, I wish I got back in, but I'll be back. Hopefully, I'll be able to drop in Thanksgiving, Christmas time, stuff like that.
Yeah, excellent. Well, yeah, definitely hit me up or anybody get in here and see if you can get some rolling in. If I'm sure you got plenty of stops to make too, though. So
Right.
yeah. Well, so I guess we'll talk about routine on the list. We're going to talk a lot about writing today. It's been something I wanted to sit down and talk with you about. We've cumulatively personally talked about writing quite a bit over the years, but
Yeah.
how's it been for you? Not in the sense of writing, but I mean, I'm a type of person that I really enjoy routine. Uh, what's it been like being your routine right now? You know, like getting thrown out of your routine. You're in this new routine. Are we
Yeah.
calling it a routine?
Yeah. It's disruption is not good for writers. The at least my experience has been that the best work that I do is like when you get really consistent. And so, if you've got your couple of hours, at best 3 or 4 hours a day where you get to write, then that's when you're being productive. I usually don't do a whole lot more than that. I did have times in my life where I would do like a morning session, an afternoon session, but those were only usually a couple of hours a piece because it's like it's like being in class. You got to concentrate. You got to it's work. You got to be there. Your brain's got to be into it. Otherwise, it's completely unproductive. You're just kind of spinning your wheels. And so you've only got like a brief period of time a day where you're going to feel fresh enough to kind of do the work. So you kind of need a routine. You got to do it every day. I mean, um, when I'm really busy, if I have an hour a day, that kind of keeps me going. So like moving, when I had administrative jobs that would sort of take me out of my routine, that's really difficult to write because you know it's not just sort of getting words on the page and getting research done. It's like the coherence of your writing. You forget what you were talking about and what you wrote the day before. And so if you have these gaps, you actually have to go back and read your own stuff again and figure out where you were, which is just an incredible waste of time. But if you stay sort of consistent with it, then you can kind of keep up with yourself and that sort of thing. So, yeah, routine for me, it's not for every writer. I think there are a lot of people that just like they can uh, they can take in all the information and they sit down for weeks at a time and just slam the things out. That's never been the way I've done it, and it's never been the way I could do it. Yeah, I mean, I'm a creature of habit by nature anyway, but especially when it comes to writing, I got to have that routine.
What do you think about this, and do you experience this? Because not necessarily with writing, but for me, with like let's say cultivating my martial arts, right? Whether it's you know assessing where I'm at, lesson like just looking through techniques like mapping out, watching videos, taking notes, looking at notes. Man, I hit these periods every year, and it's almost cyclical. And I would say that what I experience is what people metaphorically refer to as the muse. Like I have these periods each year where it's writing, it's martial arts, then it's this, and it's almost like compartmentalized throughout the year to where I hit these times where like, okay, all I can do right now is the Arkansas Civil War. Like, there's nothing else,
Yeah.
and I would just obsess over that for weeks, and then I'm like, well, I'll see you next year. It's
Yeah.
weird. It's like that with my classes and my like subjects. I've noted it, and but a lot of people are chaotic like that. I would say it's kind of chaotic.
Yeah. And I'm like that too. I think everybody is. It's for me, it's been a question of sort of forcing your way through those things. And so I know just from years of doing this that I'm not always going to be inspired and I'm not always going to have good ideas. And the crap that I put on the page isn't always going to be up to the standard that I want it to be. But I also know if I kind of continue to do it, the more often those inspired periods will come. And I know they happen. I know they're happening because they show up in my dreams. And so I do a lot of my best analytical work when I'm asleep.
That's wild. Yeah, that is
Yeah,
wild.
and I have to, and the stuff's going through my head, and it's horrible sleeping. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm a bad sleeper anyway, but uh, you're kind of half awake, kind of half asleep when you're doing it. But I'll wake up and I'll write that stuff down, get it out of my head, and be able to go back to sleep. But that's where I pick up in the morning, and I know I'm in kind of a good cycle when that's happening to me kind of naturally. And it doesn't happen all the time. It's like you can't force it. It just kind of shows up, right? And so it's like, you're making the comparison to athletics. It's, you hear about athletes talking about being in the zone. And jiu-jitsu athletes go through that for sure, where you're just having a period where everything's going right. You're anticipating everything. Everything's kind of slowed down. It's in slow motion. You know what the next move is going to be. And it's not a struggle. It's just fluid, and you can kind of impose your will. And that zone is something that you have to train for years to get into. And you know it when it's happening, and you also know it's special when it's happening. Because if I could put myself in the zone all the time, I'd be the world's best writer. I'd be the world's best jujitsu practitioner, whatever it is. But you can't, and so what you have to train yourself to do is to make that happen more often, gain incremental control of the possibility of putting yourself in the zone, I think is probably the best way to put it.
No, that is very interesting too. Because I mean, here's an analogy. I remember my very first jiu-jitsu tournament. I was like, this is not like in the gym. Rolling in the gym, I'm like one of the top 3 guys, and this is not the same.
Yeah.
It was just like the contrast of how hard it was to be in the same zone that I was in the gym, where I was comfortable, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then take like the activity that people such as yourself engage in of lecturing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I mean, your writing is good too. I've got 2 of your books over here. But imagine if your writing was, and it kind of is, but like you're lecturing, it's very relaxed, it's very chill, it's very informative. People like it. I've heard people other than myself comment on your style. I was thinking about you the other day because when I first started, I had a habit of talking too fast, which you don't do at all. You like the opposite. But man, I've kind of noticed when I will, if I kind of botch mid sentence and I pause, not even in factual stuff, just like, okay, I'm about to complete this sentence and it's not going to make grammatical sense. I will stop and think, and I can turn it into something that will make sense instead of keeping going. And those pauses, I used to be in much more of a hurry and I would not pause. I would not be thinking through it. I'm like, it's written down right here. Like, listen, you know,
Yeah.
But that's kind of the same thing, that contrast of like, man, we're in these states too. We're in the zone in certain environments and places and times, and like we can't cross perform when we
Yeah.
want.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know, there's something about, unless you're just a super person, there's only a certain amount of energy that you have. And, I think there's something about that zone, particularly with like intellectual activities or like what you're doing with this podcast, where when you've hit those like special moments when you're almost building ideas in the time that you're talking, and there's a kind of intimate connection between the words and the ideas and the conceptions that you have in your head. And it's playing off somebody else, and it's creating something unique and special and innovative. And that's in classrooms or in podcasts like this, or in lectures, or in performances really of any kind. That's kind of what you hope for. You're looking for that magic. I mean, I learned a lot from, like, when I was doing the Dean thing. I learned a lot from the people in music about that, and they're constantly sort of on this quest for, like jazz musicians, for instance. They're looking for that moment. They're improvising. They're finding that, and every once in a while you'll get something that's completely magic, right? And it doesn't happen all the time. You can't force it. You can be there and you can kind of go through the routine, but it's kind of got to happen. But the fact that you're looking for it, and the fact that you're kind of trying to make it happen, I think makes it more likely that it will. And so I think it applies to all kinds of things. I mean, wherever you're putting your energy into, you're more likely to kind of get to that zone or have something special happen. It's kind of what's disappointing with the way people do like day-to-day research about the world that they live in. People will either read their newspaper, or they'll see stuff on their Facebook or the Instagram, or those kinds of things, and they're trying to draw inspiration from that kind of stuff. And it's too superficial. They'll never get there. They might think, they get fooled into thinking that they have that moment of inspiration, but it's not based on anything. It's not based on any depth. They haven't spent time with it. It's the hardest thing about writing. It's like, my first book, it took 10 years to put that thing together. And
I meant to look this up, but was the Richard Russell book or Black Struggle Red Scare first?
Black Struggle Red Scare was the first one. And
okay.
it was, so I did part of it as like a master's thesis project, and then developed it into my PhD dissertation, and then developed it. Yeah, there you go. Developed it into the book. But from the time that I first started researching that until the time that it was actually in print was about 10 years. And it's, towards the end there was a lot of cleanup stuff. Like the last year, really 2 years, was just kind of editing and cleaning things up. And I'd already moved on to other stuff. But that's a long period of time. And you build expertise by doing the stuff every day, and by reading everything that you could possibly get, and finding the things that nobody else has, and thinking about it for long periods of time, and not drawing conclusions until you've been through everything that you could be through, and not just sort of settling for, okay, there's two interpretations on this that are competing with each other. No, man, there's a dozen, there's 15, and you got to read everything on all that stuff to have the confidence to put it out there. And that's kind of that's the craft. It's a long haul, and we always come back to jiu-jitsu when we're ever talking about anything, but jiu-jitsu is a martial art that's like that. You know,
What's the time? It's the time. Like when you said 10 years, I was like, what is it with people like you when you decide to get your jiu-jitsu black belt? You're like, let's undertake another decade-long goal. Like
yeah, right.
that's rare for people
Yeah.
to be that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I get like, I get satisfaction from short-term things. I'm always bouncing around to new hobbies and doing stuff like that. But the real joy in life are those kind of long-term investments. I think they define you more as a person just because of the time and energy that you put into them. And that's the way, you know, it's like people talk about having a calling sort of in life or professionally or however you want to talk about that. And I think, you know, callings are those things that are longer term where, okay, this is a part of you that you recognize and you want it to be part of who you are. And it's part of your, you know, you're willing to accept it as a positive part of your identity rather than just, you know, a hobby or an experiment or something that I'm going through or something that just kind of gets me through my day. It's something that you want to kind of define you. And I think something like writing has to be that way, or it's best when it's that way. It's almost like you can't help but do it. Because even when I'm not writing, I'm still forming ideas in the way that I would as if I'm writing. I'm trying to, you know, put together information in a way that is that lives up to kind of the craft of doing research and comparing ideas and using logic and making sure that I'm not wrong about things. So.
Well, okay, so this is a good segue into this. How do you overcome think about all the things that make people quit these long-term endeavors like jiu-jitsu
Yeah.
or like I have a goal to write a book or an article or a thesis,
Yeah.
whatever it may be. People quit when they for all varieties of reason, but one and you know maybe you can speak on this, and I think it's the reason people never get going is the imposter syndrome, the lack of confidence, or you start undertaking and like, man, I'll be. I thought this a second ago when you're talking, but like when you're an undergraduate, like you're trying to grasp hold of these ideas, and it's like grasping straws in a way. Like you're just so new. It's
Yeah.
thinking critically and researching. And I mean, in many cases, I mean, from my side of the classroom now, and I know it varies from, you know, state and campus, but I mean, the skills that you're working with, you got to give them to them. You got to give them the skills that you want them to get out of your class with.
Yeah. It's so I think people get, particularly with academics, I think they get expertise wrong. They think that being an expert is something that somebody is given, or that it's just, you know, because you've reached this certain rank, right? You got these letters behind your name like a belt in jiu-jitsu means that you're an expert. And that doesn't mean anything. The real expertise is what other people tell you you are. And not just anybody, but the people who are experts in the thing that you want to do. It's when they tell you that, okay, you're now an expert, or I respect you for these things that you produced, or these ideas and that you generated, or the research that you've done, or the years that you put into it. And it's people that don't just take it for granted. They don't say, okay, you put in all of this time and effort, that means you're an expert. Not really. Not really. They got to test. All right, did you read everything that you needed to read? Did you, are your conclusions sound? Does your logic track? Do the conclusions track with the evidence that you have? And it's other people who've had the time and take the time to look at your stuff and take it seriously and say, okay, yeah, you did the rigorous thing. That's what peer review is all about. And that's where expertise comes from. That's when you know that you're right. You know, there's no faking any of this stuff. You got to prove it. And that was always a great thing about jiu-jitsu, is that, I'm a black belt, but I'm not good at jiu-jitsu.
And you can really start saying that comfortably when you get a black belt. I would say that.
Yeah,
too.
man. I mean, I know a lot of jiu-jitsu. But man, the people that are good at jiu-jitsu will kick my ass. I mean, they will destroy me. But I know that because I put myself out there. I understand that. And, there's something about writing and about these long-term things where you start to, you understand yourself. And so the imposter syndrome kind of thing, it's not a syndrome. When you're starting out, it's right. You're an imposter.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know any other way to put it. You are, but if you put in the work and you put in the time and you get the feedback and you seek that feedback out and you get the peers that you respect who are experts in that field to acknowledge your work, then, man, you're not an imposter anymore. Then you're the real deal, and that's really how it all works.
Well, and people, Randy last night in his stoic way, because every now and then I'll say, "You want to say anything, Randy?" Just at the end, and he always pretty much says the same thing: keep showing up to class, don't give up.
And he's right.
And that's so applicable to everything, man. Like stuff that you want to do, that you see and are inspired by. If you don't have those attributes, like hey, I would have loved to have been a wide receiver in junior high, but I couldn't catch the football. Like that would have been cool, but I did not have those attributes. Now I do now, right? Yeah. And through martial arts, of doing that my entire adult life, and then too, I'm sure before that, I developed some physical attributes. But some people already have those attributes, and we constantly compare and look at that and like, why don't I have that? And it really ruins the journey, but also offers, I think, some perspective.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. And it's like what we were talking about. Like, the important things in your life are things that you're going to put energy into, and you have control. We don't have control over everything in our lives. But, we do have control of where we put our energy. And if you're conscious of sort of feeding your own identity and the one that you want to present to the world, then, you're always doing a good thing by investing in those things and taking the time to do them and taking the time, to do them right and get the acknowledgement from others that, hey, you may know what you're talking about. And I think there's always this danger of doubting yourself, but the doubt is good. You can't let it's when the doubt starts to paralyze you. And it's when you start thinking, okay, this is impossible for myself. And so, one of the things that I've always been afraid of, particularly with my kids and their generation and growing up on the internet and things like that, there's a lot of emphasis on talent. And, these people got to where they are because they're talented. I'm not, and never have been, a huge believer in that. I know that there are people who are naturally talented at certain things. There are people that naturally run faster than other people. There are people that are naturally built bigger and taller and, have more strength and all of those kinds of things than other people. But I honestly don't have a great deal of respect for those people unless, it's like if you've got those kind of talents and you've used them to be the world's best at something, then, great. Because if you're the world's best at something, you probably had to work really hard as well as base it on your talent. But most people like me, I'm not particularly talented in any given thing, but I'm willing to work, and I'm willing to work over long periods of time. And, and I don't even claim to be the hardest worker in the world, but I am good at working consistently. I got endurance, I guess, is the way to put it. And I know that I can overcome a lot of the things that I'm not talented in just by putting in the time. And I feel better as a person having gone through that struggle and that journey than if I was completely talented at something. I tend to want to do the hard things because the hard things have the better payoff,
Yeah, they mean more. I mean, there's a more of an intrinsic value, I guess you could say. It's hard to put a true value on it because it's hard to compare to other things. I mean, when you complete, and we've talked about this thing in past podcast, but when you complete a large project like this, or like writing a book or getting a black belt, it is a pretty deflating feeling too.
Yeah. Well, and it's anticlimactic. It's what happens is like you spend all of this time working on getting to this thing. And, right before you get there, you're pretty excited, and it seems like, okay, I just got to get through this last bit, and you're pushing through and you're keeping your head down, and you're also getting more and more humble if you're healthy, I think, because then you start to say, all right, do I deserve this? It's like being Randy, right? Randy's constantly doubting he always thinks he's an imposter, and he's not, but he always thinks that he is. But it's like the closer you get to your goal, I think the healthier that is, because you're starting to realize, okay, I'm accomplishing something really interesting here, but it's limited. And then what do I do after it's done? Is there another level? Is there something else? I mean, is there a new project? So it's kind of deflating. You end up mourning the project, right? It's like it's died. That 10 years of my life that I put into this book or I put into this black belt is gone, and it's dead. And I got to mourn that for a while, but then, you got to birth something else. And I think the healthier people, it's like, healthier people don't have that transition, particularly as writers. So like, I didn't have any transition between my first and second book. It just, I started researching my second book while I was still editing my first book. And so once the book got on my table, I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. Slide it away.
We're done with that.
On the other one. You know what I mean? And but then after the second one, once I got, I was in a place where I was helping. I was doing some research with my dad, and I was helping him with that stuff. And then I immediately got into administration after that. And so there's been this gap, and I've been trying to get back into writing over the last 2 years or so as a more routine kind of thing. And it's been hard because I'm a white belt again, and I didn't make the transition right when I had achieved the last thing. And so it's like starting from scratch, right? It's like having that long period. It's like you were talking about having an injury, you know, you have that long period where you're off the mat and everything gets rusty, and you're trying to just get back to where you were and get into the routine. And but there, it's going to be easier because you got some familiarity with it, and it'll come back faster. But you got to put in the time, right? I think a lot of people quit because they just feel like they don't want to that first part, particularly after you achieve something, and somebody says, okay, has acknowledged for you that was a good thing. Then going back and starting over and being, the lowest person on the totem pole and not having that respect and having to earn that again, that's really hard for people. And I think it's kind of that blue belt syndrome that you get with jiu-jitsu. People, they work for 2 years, they get to that blue belt, they start to feel good about their jiu-jitsu a little bit. They're able to hold their own with people that they've respected, and they kind of they get that feeling of accomplishment, and then they stop because everything after that is so much more incremental, right? you don't get the feedback, right? You're not. It's harder the farther you go, and the more you feel like I should be better than I am. And so I think people quit at blue belt because the rest of it's a grind, and going back to something that you're good at or something that you built a craft on over time. That's a grind. You got to get through that, and you got to be inspired by the kind of the little achievements, the moments of epiphany, those little creative moments that we were talking about before. That's got to be the thing. That's the quest, right? Create as many of those little things as you can, and then that's the only thing, at least for me, that gets me through that stuff, gets me through the grindy parts.
Here's a thought. I've been thinking about this a little bit lately because when I was 23, I took a layoff from my job in the car business. Went back to college. That's when you and I got together.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say I was a little delayed. Like I finally was just like, fuck it, I'm going to be a historian, whatever that means. That's all I'm interested in. And I constantly wonder this, and because of we've had some great conversations on like ego, but this, I figured you would, but I have some insight here. Some people close to me were like, what are you going to do that?
Yeah.
And then some of the same people are with the martial arts. It's like, yeah, well that, it's never going to work. What are you really going to do?
Yeah.
And I've often wondered whether or not that propelled me to do what I did or hindered me, because early on, when I didn't have that confidence, that I hadn't connected with yourself, some of the academics that really did encourage my ideas, encourage me to pursue them in history, or people like Caleb and Drang or whatever. I've constantly wondered, because the other day somebody was like, oh, my kid wants to be a music producer the whole life, but I just tell them plan B is what we need to work on, and I'm like, yeah, people used to say that to me, and look where I'm at. But then I got to thinking, I was like, man, I wonder which one's more beneficial, because I wonder if people wouldn't have said those things to me if I would have really been like, well, I'll show you,
So I don't know. I've thought a lot about this. I mean, who was it? Remember the Dirty Jobs guy, Mike Rowe, talks about this all the time.
Yeah.
That people would be better off just kind of, instead of following their dreams, just do a job and do it well. And I think that really depends on who you are. And I think it really depends on the time in your life and the kind of life that you want to make for yourself. And so I'm the kind of person that I wasn't going to be happy unless I was doing something that was inspiring to me. I grew up in a way where, you know, my parents were realistic with me, but they also instilled a lot of confidence in me that, you know, if you put your mind to it, you can do anything you want to. And they both came from really from poor backgrounds and from tough backgrounds, and they had overcome a lot of where they were from. And so they were great evidence for me that was a possibility. And so I think I just grew up thinking that was something I could do, but they also told me that, you know, all of that comes from work. You know, it comes from putting your head down. You can choose what you want to do with your life. You can, you know, if you really want to teach martial arts and own a gym, you can do that. If you really want to write books and be a historian and do that kind of stuff, you can do that. But don't pretend that it's not going to take work and that there's not a sacrifice. And the sacrifice, frankly, is money. And the sacrifice for some people is their relationships. And the sacrifice, you know, for other people is their addictions and their anxiety. And so there are also people that they don't need all that stuff, right? Their tendencies towards addiction or anxiety or towards self-doubt or, you know, those kinds of things, they probably need to just have a job, you know, and then find their satisfaction in life through other things. Because, you know, the one thing that a steady job, you know, you go work at a bank day to day and become a branch manager, at least, you know, okay, this is a 9 to 5 job. Well, for banks, it's what, 10 to 4 job. And then you get to go home every day and you can have a family and you'll have a nice house and, you know, it's just going to be a good life, you know, a good middle-class life. And then you can get satisfaction from all kinds of other things. But, you know, it's what you're looking for. What I was looking for in my life was, like I said, that kind of that inspiration, those little moments of epiphany. That's what's always been interesting to me. Is like, you know, can I learn something new about the world? That sense of discovery is constantly there, and that's why I'm always picking at stuff, right? New hobbies. That's why I did jiu-jitsu. It's like, you know, rabbit holes. It's like you and I are always talking about rabbit holes. The rabbit hole thing, if you're serious about it and you really want to find the truth of stuff, is like that becomes a part of you, and you'll pursue it regardless of the consequences, and which is kind of dangerous. But, you know, to get a PhD like I did at the time that I did, well, and even now it's the same way, it's a huge risk, right?
Especially now, right?
Oh, it's a huge risk, man. I mean, because there's no guarantee. There is no guarantee that you will get a job. There's too many PhDs, too few jobs. And there's no guarantee that you're actually going to be good at this. Because you could put in 10 years working on this stuff and it still may not be good enough, you know? And so it's like, but if you're willing to like not make a lot of money, you're willing to put in the time and do the grind, and you understand that the payoff, no matter what it is, is not going to be something material or physical. It's going to be about the journey and those little things that you get along the way. Then I think you get to the point where you're willing to take those risks. And the thing that I'm most afraid of is not having that. I feel like I'm going to die if I don't have that thing that I'm trying to accomplish, if I'm not being inspired anymore. That's death to me.
Well, that's that feeling.
I couldn't do it the other way. I couldn't do it.
That's that feeling of achievement we're talking about, at least for me, because it's the absence of the feeling, unless like you are like, oh, I already started my next book. I'm not even thinking about that one anymore. But, like there is this, you probably hit that moment of absence earlier is really like that's, but man, it is, you get those moments where you're like, you're not in that pursuit. And it's almost scary. Like I remember, we may have talked about this. I bring it up periodically, but I was like seeing my favorite band about to start lecturing, got hired full time. The gym, we were in the last location, but it was like better than ever. We were starting to talk about something like this building, and I was just like, oh wow, I'm just so far past. I've achieved all my goals. I got my master's degree in my business, and then I was like,
yeah,
shit, what now? Like
yeah,
what now?
Yeah.
I guess I'll watch this Widespread Panic concert and go home and be sad about it. Like, I mean, it was, but it was, I remember we were sitting outside of the hotel or something about to walk in, and I was sitting there thinking about that stuff. And I was like, what am I going to do? It was just this feeling of emptiness.
Yeah. I remember you texting me about that, Yeah. But it was, but it's also like, there are those periods too. I mean, and like I said, it's not just sort of who you are as a person. It's also a time of life. I mean, there's a time to just like do the things that you're doing, and you don't know what the next thing is, and you just do the best you can. You just keep going with what you have, but you got to keep looking, and what I also remember, Brian, is that it's about that time that you started investing in this kind of stuff, the podcast, doing extra things. You had already done
listening to books.
You had already done some of it, and it started some of it, but you really doubled down on this kind of stuff, and you start to develop it, and you get better at it. And it's like, what's interesting about coming to the city this year is seeing kind of like how your gym and the stuff that you do compares to what's going on here in Washington. And like the stuff that you contribute online and in social media and in connecting with their students is a rare thing, man. They don't have that kind of stuff here. They try, but they're not very good at it. And so, you can tell that the stuff that you're doing is like, it just keeps getting better.
Well, like back to writing, when I went to college, through exposure to obviously historical writing and all of my classes and assignments, my thesis and senior seminar, all that. But really what I took away from, like, when I was walking away from my college experience with a master's degree, I had, by that time, took me long enough, would say I'd learned how to learn. Like I knew, okay, I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be, it's going to take some time and work, but we know how to do it now. And I felt like, being 23, coming back in, that lack of confidence was really rooted in a lack of having the tools in place to be like, this is how you master information in the topic. Like for me, I had to become, I want to talk about audiobooks at some point because of how big of a game changer that's been for me in my learning style.
Mhm.
And then also how I can't listen to your book on audiobook because of where we're at, like in the digital age. This is a
Yeah.
conversation that, really honestly, at the time that you wrote your first book,
It
how much
didn't.
of a consideration were audiobooks?
Yeah. I mean, they existed, but nobody was doing it, and it was. And like I can't imagine doing a book now and not having an audiobook. I also, the concept of a book is, I don't know. It's like they books have their place, and they're still the most efficient way of delivering certain ideas and crafts and things like that. But uh, the way we deliver ideas is also changing, and I've always been open to sort of adapting to that kind of stuff. And I'm starting to think less about writing books than um, doing my craft and getting my ideas out there in the most effective way possible, whatever that is. And you and I have had experience doing documentary films. We've had experience doing stuff online. And, you know, I'm still pretty well convinced that in the future, a book's not going to be this kind of just paper thing. I mean, it can be part of what you do, but there's also other ways to get stuff out there. And if you're really smart, you're finding the best way to do that. And so, but what doesn't change in all of that, I mean, at least for historians, is the craft, because the craft is still dedicated to the idea of becoming an expert in the thing that you're talking about, and reading everything that you possibly can, finding something that people are interested in, uh, and that you're interested in as well, because it's got to be both. It can't be just this thing that you're only doing for yourself, and that you can make a contribution to, particularly if you're an academic. That's the idea. Is you want to push ideas, you want to push them into new places, and you want to either give information or uh, an analytical framework that's different than what's come before. So it's all about originality. It's about innovation. And so you've got to, you can't just repeat stuff. I mean, people make that mistake with history, and that's not what we do. We're looking for new stuff all the time. We're looking for the next thing, how you make a contribution to the field. And that's the thing that should be the focus. And then how you deliver that, to me, is like, there's a lot of interesting ways to do that. So I've been thinking about things like, videos and podcasts and documentaries and putting that kind of stuff together. I always have. I've just never, been able to completely commit to it, because our systems are still based, like our publishing systems and our acknowledgement systems in academia are still based on what they were, when I was in grad school, and really when my dad was in grad school, and everybody before that. It's still based on the book or the journal. And you see bits and pieces of people experimenting with other stuff, but they can't get the peer review becomes difficult when you push into that territory, because people aren't used to it. The people who have expertise have done it in this sort of this old book writing mode. And so that's what they're used to reviewing for you. So if you push outside of that, it makes them a little bit uncomfortable, but it may be time for something like that.
Well, so think with academia, this is interesting. So, I mean, I feel, and one of the reasons I was like, man, you were teaching class, but I was like finding excuses to buy you these books in jiu-jitsu for Christmas presents and stuff, because dude, they're already becoming rare. No one is like, when I started out, even people were like, oh yeah, jiu-jitsu book, the books were coming out. And then I remembered, like, I would start go to the Super Show, there wouldn't be any more books there. And the books that were there were like super discount. I remember one time I brought back, like, I remember carrying them on the plane with me, man, like a stack. I was like, oh, $60.
Yeah.
But man, I can't remember the last time someone published a martial arts book like that I wanted to buy, like an Andre Galvao's Drill to Win or a Marcelo's X Guard, like that. That stuff's coming out 2009 through like 2015, and a little bit before too. But that's now ebooks. You'll see ebooks on member sites. Courses. It's become a popular way.
But DVDs, man, that was like the transition. It's like, okay, all of the credibility of,
so we had to get a DVD drive because you can't even buy a computer that has one anymore.
Yeah. But remember that, like, when we started doing jiu-jitsu, that was your road to credibility. It was making a DVD. Remember, Hobson was doing right in the midst of his DVD stuff when we started, right? And that gave him his credibility as a professor. Right. He was an internationally known athlete. He'd accomplished so much, 5-time world champion, all that kind of stuff. But he wasn't a teacher and a coach yet. And so we had to start putting out DVDs. And then now that's morphed into like streaming, but they're still basically DVDs, right? So like John Danaher's stuff is still, it's a DVD format.
They're DVs, digital videos.
Yeah. And so that's their book, right? Yeah. That's their 100%. Contribution to the field. And I'm like, that seems much more natural for that craft than a book.
Yeah. Well, like great courses.
So much more in video and jiu-jitsu.
Great Courses has it kind of figured out. I've enjoyed Great Courses for a long time, but now they're doing a streaming service. You can before, and you still can't get the DVD of the video feed. You've got the audiobook on Audible, and you've got a PDF of the ebook. But like that's really, I didn't notice this. On the Hickson Self-Defense Unit website, not the Hickson Academy, which is fantastic, but I didn't know that for the whole self-defense unit, there's 6 PDF workbooks, and they're great. Like, and I downloaded them and put like the masterclass website is another great example. Like I just downloaded and clouded all of Tom Morello's lesson books, like the PDFs. But that's a kind of. But what is it? It's an ebook. I mean, if we're being like describing it.
Yeah, and those things like for something like jiu-jitsu or something like learning to play the guitar or something, the audio and visual elements of those that's what it's about. Those are the most important things. And so it's kind of a natural that you would do it that way, right? Or it's like learning a language. Learning a language you can learn to read a language from books, but you can't really learn to speak a language from books. You actually have to go out there and speak and listen and do that kind of stuff day to day. And so it makes you wonder about like, what's the most appropriate delivery for the things that you talk about. And so for me, a lot of the times it's still writing. It's still the book, because I talk about concepts. I talk about ideology, like what goes on inside people's heads, why they make the decisions that they make, right? What is it that they're thinking? And now I could do a video on that, but it's not going to be nearly as complex or as intricate or as careful as I could deliver it if I was writing it. Because, a lot of times with video and stuff, it'll go in one ear and out the other. Now I could do incremental things. Like if I did a bunch of videos, like, You did like, have you ever watched the Smarter Every Day YouTube channel? This guy, Dustin, I forget his last name, but anyway,
I'll write it down.
He's a scientist, and he does basically, I think he's a weapons scientist in Alabama, but he does these shows, and it's like, do you ever watch Bill Nye?
Yeah.
Science guy kind of stuff.
Yeah.
He does that kind of thing, but he talks about like all of these little engineering things or all these little science things that he's learning, and he does these videos on them, and they're very incremental, right? Or they're on very specific topics, and they move on. And like, you could do that, and you could do that with concepts, but think about like if you're trying to explain relativity theory to somebody, right? And you're trying to prove that you know what you're talking about, and give you the math and explain the concepts, and doing that in a video it wouldn't work.
Well, and that's the changing medium. So like, here's this thinking, listening to you, is maybe the book is the baseline. It's like the instruction manual for like how you're going to create the thing that came in the box, which is actually going to be a series of podcasts about what your book is about, where you bring guests in, or in an ebook companion, some blogs, maybe a book review.
Exactly. And one of the ways that I was thinking about it is, it's just like what you're talking about. It's like the book is the backbone. It's the craft. It's where you're showing your work, right? So footnotes, that's showing your work. That's okay. I've read all of this stuff. I've incorporated all of these ideas. That's where, people know whether you know what you're talking about or not, and where experts can go to see if you know what you're talking about. That's not going to reach a popular audience. That's not going to spread your ideas very well, but it's probably the best way to convince experts. But then you got to take that other step. What's going to capture an audience or give them, make a contribution to more people than the 3 people in the world who are also an expert in the thing that you're an expert in, right? Mm-hmm. And you want to do both. And so it's like, Neil deGrasse Tyson, for instance, right? He writes really scientific papers, and he's an academic. He's gotten away from that, but he was a hardcore academic. But now he also goes on talk shows and he does podcasts. And
because that's where he's going to get new audience.
And he writes books that take that really hardcore scientific stuff and make it palatable for a popular audience, right? Mm-hmm. And so that may be the kind of thing that would make an interesting project to me right now. It's like, okay, if I have the backbone of my project, right, this thing that I'm working on, and I can show my work and do the academic parts of that, but then spend the time to also go beyond that and try to expose, the basic ideas to a popular audience, or, give people who are interested not in the kind of nitty gritty craft of it, at least, some of the larger lessons that could apply to anybody. That's probably better done through, short videos, or through, documentary kinds of things, or podcasts, or other kinds of projects like that.
Well, just a mixed and varied multimedia approach. For sure. Right? Like with what you're saying, like the book is the spine of what we're talking about. It's gonna, because man, really, when I go to do research, what I start doing, I start writing it down. In some form or another, whether it's martial arts, whether it's for writing a new lecture, whatever. Just taking notes for my settings on my 24 guitar pedals down here, right? But it is remarkable how often, if it's a bulleted list, or it's hand jotted notes, or typed out bullet points, sentences, how much writing we do that varies. That for a long time I didn't take into account. Like, well, I'm not, I'm sitting around not writing. Like, I'm not writing like a large scale project, but I am writing things daily. And man, my lectures, I really did go overboard on Arkansas Civil War. 130 pages of notes on that one.
Yeah, which may be too much, man.
For what we're doing in Intro to Arkansas, you're damn straight it is. But but here's the thing too, why I got why I have so much material is because, well, yeah, Dr. DeBlack, he's got a great book over here with fire and sword.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
really there have been a lot of what we just mentioned produced. It is amazing how many resources, from lectures that are kind of like a screen share like this. We're reading primary sources by the one of the guys from Conway, Mark Christ. He has done some
Mhm.
amazing stuff. But just documentaries. There's Dwight turned me on to some new documentary. Sent me some rare one from ASU in the mail, and it's really like you start seeing where these people, and this Jack Hill guy had a production company,
Yeah.
and how much stuff that guy made. And I mean, this was in the 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah, I think the key for me is like being aware, being intentional about your communication, and being intentional about what the best way to communicate something is. And I still believe in traditional writing and that process for complex ideas. Um, but I think it's probably not, those complex ideas are going to have a kind of limited interest for people. But there are pieces of those ideas that I think are much more universal, that could connect to a lot of people. And the idea is, right, how do you figure out what's the best way to do that kind of stuff? And I think what you're finding with your lectures is that, all right, you're becoming an expert because you continue to add to this stuff, right? You're continuing to learn more and more. You're filling out the ideas, but you're also faced with this idea that, your classes, your lectures, they're much more like a video.
Yeah.
It's not a book, because it's like you can't show all your work. You don't have enough time.
100%, man. Like I went through, it's weird. This is the first year, this semester, this like yesterday. I almost text Corey about this first, so it'll be the first time I talked about it. Yesterday is the first time I took notes to class with me, but did not use them.
Oh yeah, that's
Right?
an
Like
eye.
I know, man. And I was like talking about so much more stuff that was in the notes than was in the notes. But I feel like it would have taken me longer to read through. There was like a little bit where I was like, oh, I covered all that. Like,
Yeah,
all right, we're like, I had a PowerPoint, but like the PowerPoints for me is kind of a blend between how like you would do some in your upper level course side, you into black, like it's pictures of people and some key terms,
right.
like, and it's really just a cue for me to keep talking about
Yeah,
that in that order. Um, but man, that was weird. I was like, oh, I will given this lecture like 10 times now, I guess.
yeah. So it's like, my dad used to call it working without a rope. Uh, and so, and he never, for the last, I mean, honestly, for the last 40 years, my dad never works with a rope. And so he never brings notes to anything. He'll read his notes before he goes in there, just to kind of refresh his memory. But he doesn't, there's no safety nets, there's no ropes for him. And he does it that way because I think he finds it more, it makes him better. He has to, he has to think about what he says. It's more of a challenge. He's got to make sure that he's right, and he's got to sort of, he's got to absorb all of this stuff, and able to be able to put it back out there. And so it's, it's exciting to him. I do it every once in a while, but I'm too scattered and I lose track, and it makes me freeze up. And so he's gotten used to not freezing up. He just keeps going, right? And he finds a way to do that. My greatest fear is that, I freeze up and I lose my place. But I'm also, I think some of the stuff that I do in classes, I strive for more complex ideas and stuff that sort of pushes my own limits in explaining it. And so I feel like I need to have the notes there so that I don't get lost in trying to explain the complexity of something. And so it's an interesting thing to kind of play with, and working without a rope or working without a net is, it can be an amazing way to do it. And but it's something you got to develop, right? You got to practice that because
it is.
I've been doing this forever, and I'm enough of a realist to realize that I'm not at my best when I'm doing that. My dad is. He absolutely is. He can do it without thinking about it.
I wondered. I was like driving in the car home. I was like, I wonder what's the level of that? Like, because I'm like. I mean, I kind of feel like maybe through the production of all of these types of different different little pieces of content, and I've thought this several times when we've been talking. You know what the martial arts industry really needs is a learning management system to put everything. Like, yeah, people make member websites, but like, man, I've never seen anybody's site like Marcelo was an exception on like amazing, but. Yeah. That was all encompassing, that was for the industry, not just an art that, served a function like Blackboard. You can put anything on there. You can link things. You can build modules.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's just already there. Like we have software to do, to do all these things, to create ebooks or to, but like for somebody bringing it all into one place. And I mean, I think not being able to build a website or pay somebody to run one for you is what this, cuts a lot of people from getting their ideas out there. I mean, really a really good website is the best way probably.
Yeah.
To go meet an audience.
Yeah, a tool to make it easy. And there are tools that are out there. I just don't think that there's not a whole lot that's standardized for like jiu-jitsu. I think one of the good things, and there's not a central archive, which would be an amazing thing, is kind of a martial arts archive for everything, trying to record everything that you possibly could for any kind of martial arts and put it in a single place and have that kind of stuff. That would be remarkable. But
like a journal, like what we're talking about, EBSCO or JSTOR for other industries.
Yes. But it would also have to mean that like the economics would have to change. And so, the thing with academic stuff is that it's public domain and it's meant for a public domain. The trouble is with people with the videos and things like that, they're trying to make money off of it. And so, but there's going to be a period of time where all of those old things stop making money, but you'll still want access to them. You'll still want to be able to see them. It's like you and I are constantly going back and trying to look at like old judo videos and crap like that, from the turn of the century. Yeah. And, having a place that had all of that stuff would be kind of amazing, or like, even like Bernardo Faria's stuff and BJJ Fanatics and having all of it. It's like, man, Bernardo, what are you going to do with all that stuff when it stops making money?
Imagine the servers that he has to store all that. I've been downloading, I'm clouding all of my BJJ Fanatics, the dynamic striking videos, and we're at like 300 gigs right now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, and it needs to be preserved. That's some golden knowledge in all of that stuff. Yeah, I mean, as a historian, your basic instinct is like, all right, we got to keep all. There's so much good stuff there. We got to keep all this stuff. We got to find a way to keep that for people that come in the future.
Well, and back to writing, I mean, is preserving it in the way that Bernardo's doing. I mean, I think about this all the time. You know what? I talked about cuneiform today, and we still have that stuff.
Yeah,
We can still look at, a few years back, they opened up the Rosetta Stone. They're like, you know what, Brian and Jeff, you get to touch it. Everybody gets to touch it. It's not going to hurt it. You just touch it, and it's like, we can't touch a jiu-jitsu video.
yeah,
Like we could touch DVDs, but those things rot over time, So it's like, with writing, I think about that all the time because I get, it's the prehistory lectures. I just finished those, and it's like, well, the time before written records, the time before writing, that was a real troublesome time for us historians. We don't really like this time as much because we have to guess and talk to geologists who know way more than us about rocks and what's this rock mean,
yeah,
And but like, once you get writing, you still should talk to the geologist, but it changes the whole game. And we're in a time where it's like, yeah, digital mediums, but what about in an event like the new Madrid earthquake for our region? Like another event like that where you have 4 cataclysmic earthquakes across 6 months. Like, what's that going to do to our infrastructure? We're not even going to be able to do this for weeks.
yeah. Yeah, and what's the best way? So, and the technology changes so quickly. So you were talking about needing to get a special DVD player because they don't sell DVD players anymore, right? So there are. It's actually an interesting archival experiment. I forget which library it is in New York, but there's a museum that deals with kind of modern technology, and one of their goals is to preserve all of the players, all of the different kinds of technology that you use to collect information and put out information. And so they've got like old zip drives and they've got old floppy disk drives, and they part of their purpose is to keep that stuff available and running and in a decent condition so that you can go back and do it. It's like we talked about it a little bit when I don't know if you ever took the class where we talked about presidential recordings.
Is that 45 to president, or was that like an actual?
We may have done a little bit in there. I think I did some specialized classes and stuff like that too. But basically, like, there have been presidential recordings of what presidents have been doing in the White House since FDR, and actually before him. There were some, but there's not a lot of them. FDR,
the LBJ tapes are the main ones that we like to listen to.
LBJ tapes are the main, and think about it. Those were on tape. They've digitized those, okay? But they had to go out and get the tapes and have a tape player to be able to get that in a digital form.
Yeah.
Eisenhower used these wax discs. They used to have this system where it actually carved like a record as you were speaking into the dictaphone.
Wow.
And so they had to convert all those wax discs to.
What would that have been, the 50s?
Yeah.
Or earlier, late 40s?
50s. So they converted that to tape, and then FDR's dictaphone was even, a kind of more rudimentary form of that. And so keeping that technology to get the access to that kind of information is like a really important thing now. And I don't think, we have not come to the grip as a global community. We have not come to grips with the idea that we are experiencing a communication revolution on a scale that's probably bigger and more important than the printing press. The printing press created the Reformation, it created wars, it created empire, it contributed to the Enlightenment. We have no idea what our change to digital communication is. We have no idea what that's doing to us as a people. And we don't have systems yet in place to archive all of that stuff, you know? So I think we're at a really unique period in history to have to think about that kind of stuff and work with it.
Yeah, no, I mean, we went from like I mentioned this in my class this morning. A flash drive when I started was $40 for 512 megabytes. Go ahead and just say it.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're fine, dude. Hello, tell her I said hey.
So, yeah, I was just trying to tell her that we were on the podcast. So yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Excellent. But okay. So like when I was like right out of high school, so I was 19. So it's been like 06. I bought a 512 megabyte flash drive. It was $40.
Yeah.
It's like we've gone from that to me easily being able to dump 100 gigs worth of stuff in my cloud in 20 minutes at the university yesterday.
Yeah.
You know, and from like, I mean, I think about like, okay, that same time I was buying that flash drive, the iPhone came out.
Yeah.
Like the same exact time. Like it was that summer between my senior year and freshman, like when I first went to college. And the amount of technological innovation from those little bitty flash drives, which were expensive. Like I remember being like $40. Yeah. Oh man. Then I bought like a 74 gig like a few years later for like considerably less money. You know, but it's like, but why was I buying that? To store my papers.
Oh, I think I bought like a 30 gig thumb drive the other day for $16.
Oh yeah.
You know, it was, and it's just kind of remarkable how much. And what's interesting too about that, I mean, if you think about the preservation of information, like with video and audio and stuff like that, it takes so much more digital power, and it takes so much, you know, more compression to get that stuff together. And so, you know, we've had this greater and greater need for storage space, but we keep getting better at it. I mean, we're at a point where like storage is not necessarily our biggest limitation anymore. It is for some things, but not for everything. But like with a book, like digitizing a book, even my incredibly over processed, word processed document, you know, we're talking about it's like what, 1/10 of a megabyte?
It's nothing. I mean, and really, I don't know why, but the videos I'm cranking out are like they're not as big as they used to be. It seems like the videos I'm downloading from BJJ Fanatics or whatever, like the file sizes are not as big as they were 5 years ago.
The compression gets better and better. But it's also an interesting thing about books or writing that you can put, in some ways, much more complex information into a smaller space than you can with video or audio. Think about that. Yeah. Now, is there a place for that? And has anybody ever really considered that as a value of the traditional writing craft? And I'm not sure
Think about a library. How much physical space, an actual like Library of Alexandria, 750,000 books, or any major library in New York or DC or wherever is going to be massive. But we can't like, man, there's like one bookstore I know where to go to in Conway that I stop in periodically. Like we don't even have bookstores anymore. Really.
Yeah, but you can digitize that library where you've had all of that space. You know, and you've used all that space and all those books and stuff. You can digitize all of that, and you can fit it in a file that's probably as big as, like, you know, 3 or 4 movies. You know what I mean? And so you can it's incredibly efficient to put words, the written word, into digital form. Mm-hmm. And maybe there's a value in that in the future. It's it's something interesting to think about. So that, so I guess what I'm saying is that I haven't abandoned the idea of writing. I haven't abandoned the idea of words as communication. I don't think human beings have gotten anywhere close to getting past that. I think they're much more able to augment that these days and to express themselves in in ways that might appeal to other people or connect to other people better. But I don't think any of that has transplanted the written word yet, because the written word is still extremely efficient, and it's also our main way of communicating. Now, if we get to a point where we've got telepathy and crap like that, maybe you don't need to do it.
Neuralink.
Exactly. If you can Neuralink, but even Neuralink stuff, right? That's going to be based on digital files.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And digital files are, the processing, the computers were made for words. When Alan Turing was doing his Colossus machine, they were translating, codes from German. They were words.
Yeah, I mean, think of too,
machine.
Like human beings were perhaps made for words, right?
Well, of course, yeah.
I mean, because this is all the everything we're discussing is the efforts of man, and really, like if you just talked about technology to convey words or ideas, but I was talking about a philological approach to studying history earlier. Like, oh, hey, this pharaoh's name's Montuhotep. That means the war god's pleased. The Egyptians never lost a battle. On the record, they did not, right? But this name, since they never reported losses, it can tell us something, right? But like how we work with words, like not just linguistically, like a linguist, but very interesting. Like I've been thinking, like, okay, like words, like when you start talking about that earliest prehistory, like around fire, and then you like, these people, they might have had speech. And we just like, that's a sentence in a book. And like my next favorite bullshit sentence is, and then they domesticated plants and animals.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
While we're in this 3-paragraph section about 100,000 years of history,
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to steal from one of my favorite authors, a guy named Scott Momaday. But the first words in the Bible are in the beginning was the word.
I just thought of that.
You know what I mean? It's like and what that suggests is that it's the idea, it's the communication that we are about, and we are about explaining ourselves. That's kind of from my sort of cosmological perspective, that's what we're here for, is to try to explain why we're here and try to make the place where we live a little bit better for each other. And that kind of pursuit gets to that fundamental stuff that we were talking about earlier, and what you're willing to make sacrifices for, and what drives you and pushes you through sort of these long-term things. That's kind of what I'm expressing in all of that. I'm a big believer in human communication, and I'm a big believer in stories, and that we need to tell truthful stories about ourselves. I think that's where self-discovery comes from. I think that's where human progress comes from, and I think that's how we get to a place where maybe we can be a little bit better than we were yesterday. And so those stories are really important, and we tell a lot of sad stories about ourselves these days, and I contribute to that because I'm drawn to that. I want to know what's inside people's heads, particularly people that I don't understand and I don't agree with. So it's an act of empathy, but it's also done very much from a place of skepticism. But that's where understanding comes from for me. That's how I, that's how I feel like I can make the world a better place, is sort of, okay, can I get people who don't understand each other to understand each other a little bit more? And does that make, I'm hoping that that's what makes us better. That's sort of that's one of the belief systems that I've had since I was little.
Yeah, no, that's I had this thought just recently, but like how much of what we're talking about, this feeling a need to communicate and create through writing, or it's almost inherently linked to particularly you get into institutional stuff like religion, but the human being's attempt to grapple with these is an infinite being, or sorry, a finite being grappling with infinite concepts, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of our production, a lot of what we're creating is an attempt to kind of explore and come to terms with, or try and wrap our finite mind around an infinite, like relativity or
Yeah.
string theory or whatever, an
Yeah.
afterlife.
Yeah. Or even just the basic things like, one of the things that I think historians do, and the reason it's kind of worth doing, is that it helps us acknowledge that our stories aren't, they're not isolated. It brings out our connections to each other, and that the things that affect us now, like they are both from the individual choices that we make, but also the choices that the societies and cultures that we live in make. And so we are victims of history, and we are culpable for our history, whether we want to be or not.
Man,
We just
North
are.
Korea got me thinking about what you just said a ton lately.
Yeah.
People being born into that. That Yeonmi Park, I think is her name, that was on Joe's recently.
Yeah.
And I've seen
Yeah.
some of her stuff, but like the whole how they are like, okay, Kim and his dad are Jesus and God. Okay, so just the Christianity story, but in the sense, and like people are born into that. And like her comments when the Christians are like, look, we can get you out of here,
Yeah.
but you got to believe. She's like, well, how am I going to remember this? And they're like, it's the same story as Kim and his dad.
Yeah.
So, and she's like, well, how do I know you're telling me the truth? And she's
Yeah.
like, you don't, like, you just got to trust us.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, it's like all this stuff about like race lately, and it's, you don't have to feel individually culpable for racism if you're not a racist, and that's not something that's part of your makeup and who you are. But you do have to acknowledge that we got race problems in the country, and we've had them, for a long time, and it's based on, things like slavery. And we're not, you got to accept the idea that we may never get over that, right? We may never be past that. And so, how do you deal with it? And as a historian, the best you can hope for is that you acknowledge that that is a truth, that stuff happened. And, then how you deal with it changes over time. It depends on kind of, where you are and what you need to do. And, so we go through, you end slavery and you go through a civil rights movement, and then, you struggle with all the current stuff that we're struggling with now. And, you hope through understanding that all of that stuff gets better. But the thing that I worry about is like, the thing that's anathema to being a historian is this idea that you don't get to talk about that, or that we're past that. We're not past anything. I mean, as well as I do, we're still dealing with some of the same kind of stuff that the Egyptians were dealing with.
Well, it's not where I wouldn't say we're close to forgetting it, but that's the, any historian, that's one of their paranoias, that an event like the Holocaust
Right.
or like slavery falls out of the collective memory in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it needs to be, it doesn't have to be ever present. It doesn't have to, it doesn't have to, inform every part of your living daily identity. But man, you sure better know it's there. You sure better know the dangers of repeating that stuff, because if you don't think about it sometimes, then we're back to like everything that the country's formed on, and individual liberty and the protection of those rights and things like that. You just throw that crap out the window, you know. So that struggle, that burden, that anxiety over those kinds of historical issues, I think are important. They're necessary so that people can maintain their freedoms.
Well, for me, and I mean, I think you kind of mentioned this a second ago, awareness of some of these things, with past events in our recent history, not 2020, but they're what make you, learning about them, whether you're reading, researching, writing, or what make you empathetic. But also, I think what, for me, it's been a sense that, okay, I read these books and I had these conversations with these people who read these books, and I found out this information, and you didn't read any books about it. And I've become highly empathetic about this, and it just becomes your reality, and you talk to people about it and they don't want to hear it, didn't read the books, but that's not the reality. And I think that kind of goes into, I mean, people call it, I guess, white guilt, but it's like, no, not enough people care about this for me. You know what
Mhm.
I'm saying? Like reading about these topics, reading about Elaine, reading about.
Yeah.
There's a sentence in my Arkansas history textbook that says when Black people and poor people could no longer vote, political violence in Arkansas came to an end.
Yeah.
Like, it's stuff like that, and you when you go through that, you realize how close we are to something like that just taking place, or that it took place in the not too distant past, and you carry around these sort of anxieties, and so much, like so many of our fellow Americans seem oblivious to it. Not only that, they don't want to hear about it. Like, they didn't
Yeah.
put in the work on it, but also are not going to. And your work, it's not something we're going to bring up. It's just a real weird,
Yeah.
and it's hard to not, like, I mean, I just kind of like, okay, yeah, well, let's not argue about it anymore. I tried like a lot, and you guys don't accept it. So if you have questions, let me know.
Well, and it creates that situation like, and we were talking earlier, I was saying that one of the things that I'm most afraid of is not understanding the reality of the world that I live in, and stop trying to discover that. So on the one hand, turning off the possibility of studying anything, I don't care what it is, to me is death. It's just not in me. But the other part of that is that I know through writing books, through putting in 13 years in jiu-jitsu, that I have to prove what's real. And part of that journey, particularly in jiu-jitsu, is that you learn so much, and you get better at jiu-jitsu really fast, and you continue to learn over years, and you get better and better at it. But the reality is you can get to, you can put in all of those years and there's still a whole bunch of people that can kick your ass. That is real. That's undeniable. And if I'm not pursuing that reality, if I don't understand that as a truth, that's another part of me dying. And so acknowledgement of something like the struggles of history, the bad crap that we've gone through, the evils that we've done to each other as human beings, and taking responsibility that I am maybe not individually responsible for all of that, but I am in a line of people. I'm connected to people who are. And therefore, I have a historical responsibility. I've got a social responsibility that transcends my lifetime, right? I have to acknowledge that in order to acknowledge that's the real world. That's, that's the fight that I'm not going to win. And that's truth to me. That's a better understanding. And I think I'll be a better person for that understanding. And I think other people will be better for that understanding. And maybe that's the root of the whole thing. That's why we try to share ideas. That's why we try to take the time, because not everybody's taking the time to do it. Right. But that's our job. We take the time to try to figure it out and to try to share it with other people. And, maybe they listen, maybe they don't, but I think part of the job is to try to find ways that people will listen. And continue to evolve in how we do that.
For sure. Well, man, so I'm going to wrap up with this. Just generally speaking, for people in the audience, you and I have had so many of like little, and like you worked a lot. I sent you some things I thought we might would talk about. And I feel like you worked the vast majority of it into this conversation because, it's we're talking about writing, but what are some things you might say to somebody that is just getting into writing? Like, I know Micah Piker here at the gym, like he's been writing and have been interested and talked with me about it. But for people like that, they might not have a strong English background. I know your undergrad is in English or a historical background, but they want to write. Like what sort of tips or strategies do you have for them?
This part of it's easy. Writers read and writers write. It's as simple as that. So if you want to write something, it's probably because you were inspired by somebody else's writing. So, the easiest thing that you can do is go read their stuff and figure out how they put it together, right? Become an expert in how they communicated their ideas. And, if you got a certain topic that you're interested in, you just start gathering gathering as much stuff as you can. And then you wallow in that stuff. You get in there and you think about it, right? It's that got that analogy from Dr. Gatewood where you got to wallow in the mud a little bit. And that's basically just get all that stuff that you've been doing research on and sit there and think about it. Like, what does it mean? What are the possibilities for this? And then you write. Writers write. Like, you need to write something every day. And it doesn't have to be a lot. Like, I think I wrote, I wrote a bunch of stuff today, but it was not like writing for my books. It was writing for other kinds of stuff that I have to do. But I write for the books that I'm trying to produce every day. But sometimes it's like a paragraph, I think I wrote a few sentences today. I came up with some theses that I want to follow. But on a day like that, where I know it's not going to be real productive because I don't have a lot of stuff that's feeding into, a longer writing session, the rest of the time I'm reading stuff. I'm looking for that next idea. I'm preparing for that next paragraph. I'm preparing for that next page. Good writers, best writers in the world write a page a day. That's pretty much it. Now it may take them 4 hours to do it, but they write a page a day. And if you set that out, and Brian, you and I have talked about this, that like, if, you take out weekends of your year and vacations and other days, you still got 250 pages of material at the end of a single year. It's a ton. It's a great start.
And how many years did you ride in your car since you've been a professor? Like
man,
like 4?
It was a lot. It was like 5 years or something.
Yeah. That's audiobooks, man. That's why
listening to books, exactly. It's huge. Yeah. And so I've started to double up. So what I do now is like, I will listen to a book, and then I will buy the book, the hard
Kindle,
copy.
Yeah.
No, the hard copy for my research, and so that way I have the footnotes and all that kind of stuff. If it's a history book, and I can use it as a reference. But if I'm like reading the book these days, I'd much rather listen to it, like in the car or when I'm running or doing something like that. Mm-hmm. I tend to just, I still love to read, but that's become a more efficient way for me to absorb the general ideas. And then I go back and I read more for like specific things. I need to pluck this out, or I'm going to borrow this idea, or, I'm going to use this as part of my research. And then I'll go back, and that's where I do kind of the heavy reading. But the general stuff, I want to listen to the whole thing. I just want to kind of listen.
Man, I just got into Kindle and doing what you're saying, but
Kindle's
listening
too. Yeah.
Listening, if there's audio, like I'll do the screen reader, but some of them I'll have the Audible and then be reading the digital, right? Yeah. Which is just for short stuff. Like honestly, if I'm just trying to work through a section in a chapter, that's perfect. But yeah, that is like doubling up, as you described.
Yeah.
There's several ways you can do that.
Exactly. And I buy the books for citations and footnotes, but most of the stuff, there's so much stuff you can get digitally now, and there's so many different ways to consume it. It's kind of great. But anyway, the big advice, writers read and writers write. That's and you do it every day. And you just you build towards these general ideas, and then you got to be be willing to change. So when you find out something's not true, or you find out your initial thesis is wrong, you got to be scientific. You can't be tied to your original ideas. You got to be willing to go where the evidence leads you, and you got to be honest enough to do that. And so overcoming that sort of personal bias about things is incredibly important, at least for the kind of stuff that we do as historians. Maybe not for other kinds of writing, but for what we do, it's everything. Yeah. And then I think the one other thing that I would say is when you get writer's block, or when you start to kind of doubt yourself, you just plow through. Just give yourself a break. Just put something on paper. Just keep working at it. It'll come around. Human beings are amazing. I don't think necessarily writing takes a lot of, it takes a lot of knowledge, and it takes a lot of endurance, but you don't have to be the brightest person in the world. You don't have to be the person with the biggest vocabulary. You got to be willing to develop those things, right? And get better at those things. But with enough time, you'll get there. So there's no reason to kind of like, the only reason it won't happen, it's like a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. The only reason it won't happen is because you quit. It's the only reason,
Take it from Randy.
Yeah, human beings are meant to communicate, man. So everybody can do it. You just gotta keep plugging at it.
Yeah. True that, man. That is perseverance. That's why, like, I'm always trying to relate to people the tenets of the life skills that people equate with martial arts. And I mean, perseverance, like that's
It's everything.
so much of what we talked about today is just persevering through the self doubt and
Yeah.
the anxieties and the steering a different direction and
Yeah, and living poor for a little while, or or yeah, putting your time into your writing versus the time that you spent, doing whatever else you did. But we're not talking about a lot of time. I mean, it's like if you're consistent, it'll add up. So.
Yeah, right on, man. Well, I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Everybody's been asking about you.
Yeah.
So
Say
we'll
hi
miss
to
you.
everybody. Yeah, I miss being there, man. It's it's one of the hardest parts about this year. It's been exciting though. I mean, Washington's great, but yeah, I miss the jiu-jitsu. I miss the gym.
Well, tell Stella that we said hello, and Andrew
Yeah,
too.
she was here somewhere.
I think I heard her clicking around. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent.
I will, man. Yeah.
All right. Well,
Say
have
hi
a
to
good one,
Cora,
man.
too. All
I
right.
will. We'll see you
Later.
soon.
Bye.